Long before the modern Pokédex grew into thousands of entries, Kanto's creatures defined what the world of Pokémon felt like. Every cry, every sprite, and every sound effect that echoed through the early Game Boy's speaker built the foundation of an entire universe. The very first region's data was stored in a grid no larger than a spreadsheet, and each Pokémon existed as a handful of coded lines that together created life, behavior, and memory. The grass outside Pallet Town was designed using a deliberate asymmetry, one extra patch near the corner of the first route, so new players would feel they had discovered something. That tiny tile difference symbolized curiosity before anyone even caught their first companion. The sky blue used in Viridian City's palette came from the developer's reference photo of a quiet morning in Tokyo. Masuda described it as the color of air that hasn't been touched yet. In the earliest drafts, Professor Oak's lab contained no Pokeballs, only documents and charts. The glowing spheres were added late when the team realized the player needed something physical to connect to. The cry of Bulbasaur was one of the first recorded directly from a synthesizer prototype, nicknamed the Green Box. It used sound channels meant for percussion, giving it that low, earthy tone. Ivysaur's voice reused the same waveform, stretched longer to sound older, like breath leaving a leaf. Venusaur's heavier sound was formed by layering those same samples 3 times, a symbol of growth through repetition. Charmander's sprite was drawn by Ken Sugimori during a humid summer evening. He said the tail flame's brightness looked right only after the studio lights dimmed. Its evolution, Charmeleon, was colored using a red crayon pigment scanned directly from an art supply catalog. Charizard's wings were shaded with a teal gradient, not because of accuracy, but because that color printed better on limited Game Boy screens. Squirtle's shell was based on a stylized tortoise the designers saw on a Tokyo temple roof tile. When its tail curl was drawn, the artist called it a wave frozen in joy. Wartortle's ears were inspired by Japanese wind gods, while Blastoise's cannons were drawn from industrial pipes outside the Game Freak office. Caterpie's body sections follow a perfect Fibonacci spiral when measured by pixel ratio, making it one of the first mathematically balanced sprites in the series. Metapod's crescent body came from tracing the shape of a Japanese crescent moon charm meant to ward off change. Butterfree's eyes, unusually large for early sprites, were exaggerated to make sure players could still read emotion through the Game Boy's low resolution. Weedle's horn was designed to point slightly off-center to avoid optical blending on monochrome screens. Kakuna's rigid expression came from a single angled line of shadow that the artist refused to edit. Beedrill's body stripes have alternating pixel widths to suggest flight vibration, one of the earliest examples of implied motion through static art. Pidgey's wings in its back sprite contain one missing feather, removed because memory limitations required freeing a tile for the Pokeball icon. Pidgeotto's name translates in part to small dove, but the team said it was meant to represent the feeling of returning home. Pidgeot's cry overlaps the frequency of real kestrel calls, one of the first times animal recordings were referenced for design. Ratta's early concept had red eyes instead of purple. That color was changed because the developer felt red made it look too confident. Raticate's long teeth in the back sprite nearly touched the screen border, pushing the boundaries of Game Boy aspect ratios. Spearo's beak angles exactly 22 degrees upward in its front sprite, a decision made after testing readability when viewed under backlight reflection. Fearo's wingspan stretches across nearly the entire tile width of its data grid, which was unusual for the time. Ekans was the first Pokemon coded with a backward name intentionally. Arbok's pattern was unique between versions, mirrored to save data while still looking alive. The team referred to that effect as the silent hiss. Pikachu's original proportions were shorter and rounder, resembling a beanbag. Its body was lengthened after anime feedback encouraged a more energetic posture. Raichu's tail in the earliest sprite actually touched the floor. This was raised after playtesters confused it for a shadow. The color yellow used in Pikachu's later games is officially Pika Yellow, a hex value unique to the franchise. Sandshrew's ground pattern came from hand-drawn hexagons mimicking bricks from a nearby apartment wall. Sandslash's quills were shaded with alternating dark and medium pixels because real gradients couldn't yet exist on screen. Nidorann's male and female versions were once going to share a single Pokédex slot. Gender coding hadn't been invented in the system yet, so the team simply doubled the entry manually. This small workaround became the origin of gender differentiation in later generations. Clefairy's body color changed multiple times during testing, from pale orange to pink, before Masuda chose the tone that best reflected Dreamlight. Clefable's ears were originally smaller but enlarged in the anime adaptation, which later influenced the remade sprites to match. Vulpix's 6 tails were drawn individually on paper and overlapped later in the sprite editing process. The 7th tail for Ninetales was created by simply mirroring a time-saving secret even Sugimori later laughed about. Jigglypuff's roundness was mathematically calculated to fill the Game Boy's sprite box without touching any corner, which the artist called perfect containment. Its curl was drawn with one continuous pencil stroke. Wigglytuff's fur texture came from chalk shading, giving it a softer appearance even in black and white. Zubat's lack of eyes was a hardware necessity, since small dots tended to vanish on low-contrast screens. Golbat's massive mouth, however, was intentionally exaggerated to read clearly, even when compressed. Oddish's walking animation was one of the first to include directional shadowing, hinting at lighting, even before it was a mechanic. Gloom's dripping nectar particles cycle through 3 frames, but only 2 are ever visible on screen, a quirk caused by the Game Boy's refresh speed. Vileplume's petal count differs slightly between games. One version shows 8, the other 7, depending on cartridge revision. Paris and Parasect were built around a fungus concept from Japanese folklore, referencing mushrooms that controlled insects. The orange of their shells was chosen because darker tones bled into the background on early LCD screens. Venonat's fur pattern was drawn to mirror static snow from television signals, since the artists were studying electronic interference textures that week. Venomoth's wing sparkle effect in later remakes replicates that same noise pattern as Homage. Diglett's soil mound has more shading detail than Diglett itself, a subtle commentary by one artist that you can't know what you never see. Meowth's coin symbol was borrowed from traditional Maneki Neko statues in Asakusa, but the angle of its paw was reversed to welcome fortune inward instead of outward. Persian's whisker symmetry was adjusted frame by frame in animation tests, which is why its idle movement looks unusually smooth. Psyduck's blank stare originated from test sketches where the designer tried to make an expression halfway between panic and meditation. Golduck's gem glows using a mathematical sine function, one of the earliest instances of wave simulation in the series. Mankey's fighting pose was derived from observing monkeys at the Ueno Zoo. The artist noted that they always looked like they wanted to yell at the wind. Growlithe's striped fur alternates pixel tone in a sequence of light, dark, light identical to tiger stripes seen in wood-grain photographs. Arcanine's fur gradient introduced dithering techniques still used by Game Freak decades later. Poliwag's swirl, mirrored for left-handed visibility, represents an actual biological feature, a tadpole's intestines, drawn with careful stylization to remain cute. Poliwhirl's hands have a thicker outline because Sugimori wanted the feeling of water pushing back. Poliwrath's internal model later reused those same polygons in Pokemon Stadium, making it one of the first complete 3D carryovers. Abra's eyes are permanently closed in all artwork, symbolizing concentration. Kadabra's spoon curvature follows a natural arc measured from an antique silver utensil found in a prop shop. Alakazam's mustache was given slight asymmetry so that it always looked mid-sentence. Machoke's arm shading in red and blue has reversed light direction compared to every other sprite in the game, an unnoticed error never corrected in remakes. Machoke's belt insignia uses real Japanese wrestling belt proportions. Machamp's forearms move on alternating frame cycles so that no limb overlaps animation efficiency at its peak. Bellsprout's body shape came from a Buddhist bell handle the artist saw on a temple altar. Weepinbell's expression intentionally resembles a hanging lantern, and Victory Bell's leaf tip bends inward to simulate gravity. Tentacool's blue tone was chosen because brighter colors caused flickering underwater effects. Tentacool's red orbs glow at exact rhythmic intervals, one for each pulse of its animation loop. The faint outline around Geodude's arms is thicker than its bodies because the designer wanted punches to feel separate from stone. Graveler's shading forms a nearly perfect sphere when mirrored, while Golem's rocky segments subtly spiral counterclockwise. Ponyta's flames use alternating warm and cool tones, the earliest use of color cycling in the series. Rapidash's mane animates over 6 frames instead of 4, making it smoother than any other first-generation sprite. Slowpoke's posture was inspired by clay riverbank statues of animals resting in stillness. Its tail curl is identical to the shape of the Kanto coastline on the world map. Magnemite's screws in red and blue rotate opposite directions because hardware limitations prevented identical sprite flipping. Magneton's 3 parts are not identical copies. Each magnet has a slightly unique pixel offset to imply dynamic pull. Farfetched's leak was drawn from life. An artist bought real scallions and sketched them from multiple angles on a lunch break. Doduo's heads blink asynchronously 1 frame apart to suggest independent thought. Dodrio's beak angles follow an equilateral triangle, representing balance between its 3 personalities. Seal's design was the result of an inside joke to make the simplest possible seal. Dugong's name was kept unchanged across languages because every localization team agreed it sounded like a sigh. Grimer's sludge was hand-painted in watercolor, scanned, and then dithered into pixels, making it one of the only sprites born from physical paint. Shelder's tongue was accidentally colored darker in Japanese prints. Rather than fix it, Game Freak kept the error as a mark of origin. Cloyster's inner shell shape matches the silhouette of a heart turned upside down, symbolizing protection through hardness. Ghastly's gas cloud flickers unevenly because the team couldn't store perfectly round gradients yet. Haunter's shadow outline forms a smile only at certain angles. Gengar's coloring was shifted slightly toward red because the original purple blended too much with black backgrounds. Onix's body segments were positioned along a mathematical wave curve to simulate movement, a primitive animation illusion achieved through spacing rather than motion. Drowsy's concept came from the Japanese myth of the tapir-like Baku that devours nightmares. Its hands always remain visible in sprites, as if ready to reach into dreams. Hypno's pendulum swing animation was programmed to tick exactly 60 times per minute, a perfect second counter. Krabby's snapping claws alternate sound channels to create stereo effect even on mono speakers. Kingler's oversized pincer uses twice the usual pixel weight, which is why it looks thicker than anything else in the game. Voltorb's reversed colors were originally an artist's mistake, later canonized as lore born when a Pokeball's energy ran wild. Execute's faces have subtle differences. Some smile, some frown, some look vacant, representing separate minds in a shared shell. Cubone's skull helmet was drawn fused to its head in concept sketches, turning tragedy into biology. Marowak's bone weapon shares the same sprite data as Cubone's, recolored and reused. Hitmonlee's extended kick animation uses stretched pixels, not extra frames, an early example of artificial motion blur. Hitmonchan's gloves are red to read clearly against both blue and green backgrounds. Lickitung's tongue frame has more pixels than any other first-gen animation. It required a second sprite sheet just for that motion. Coughing's skull and crossbones symbol was originally upside down. Localization flipped it for Western audiences. Rhyhorn's sprite was the very first drawn by Game Freak, the prototype model for all later Pokemon. Chansey's egg color matches the shade of the healing light inside Poke Centers. Kangaskhan's baby originally had no face until Sugimori added 1 hour before deadline. Horsey's bubble animation was used as the base for Pokemon Stadium's particle system years later. Staryu's Gem Flash synchronizes to the battle theme tempo, a musical connection hidden in plain sight. When the first fossils of Kanto were designed, the team drew them to look like spirals of time itself. The ammonite shell used for Omanite was modeled from a real fossil found in a Japanese science museum, scanned and reshaded until it fit within the Game Boy's 4-color limit. Omastar's spikes were added only after playtesters described its evolution as too gentle. Kabuto's back pattern hides a faint grid in its pixels, an unintentional reflection of how its image was assembled tile by tile. Kabutops's scythes, on the other hand, were inspired by old samurai sickles used for harvesting rice, a small cultural echo buried beneath the fossil theme. Aerodactyl's roar was one of the only cries created entirely from static. It has no musical pitch, only distortion tuned to sound like wind. The developers said it was meant to feel prehistoric, like sound from before melody existed. Snorlax's rounded frame came directly from a sketch of Game Freak illustrator Koji Nishino sleeping at his desk. Masuda joked that they captured a wild developer. Its constant sleeping pose was kept because it felt universal. Everyone who played could recognize that kind of tired piece. The Safari Zone gate sound in Fuchsia City was recorded by clicking the lid of a plastic container and amplifying it through the Game Boy's speaker simulation. The reverb was left in, creating an accidental echo that sounded like space behind the door. Articuno's wingspan fits perfectly into a 128x128 sprite box, the maximum size available before data compression caused distortion. Zapdos's sharp angles were a direct result of pixel economy. Each jagged line used one less byte than a curve. Moltres' flames were shaded using the same orange gradient as Charizard's, linking them visually even before the Pokédex said they were legendary. Dratini's smooth motion in the Safari Zone water was an early experiment in fluid animation. Its evolution, Dragonair, was designed to have gentle curves with no sharp edges, a representation of maturity through calm. Dragonite's round body was controversial among artists, but Sugimori insisted that a friendly dragon would make a better finale than another monster of war. The cave entrance leading to Mewtwo's chamber uses darker shading than any other map in Kanto, giving the illusion that the air itself is heavier. Mewtwo's base color was adjusted to purple so it would contrast against the gray of its laboratory walls. The result made it appear to glow without any lighting engine at all. Mew's original sprite file name was Mew0, hidden in unused data until a curious developer revealed it months later. It was placed in the smallest pocket of available memory, literally squeezed in after everything else, a creature born from leftover space. The Pokeball throw animation during the Mewtwo encounter was timed to be slightly slower than normal battles, forcing players to feel hesitation. That pause gave the catch attempt a kind of reverence the team wanted to preserve. Nugget Bridge's golden hue was chosen to look like sunlight at 4 p.m. in Tokyo's Shuginami district, near where Game Freak's office stood. Masuda said that hue felt like a promise. The bicycle music tempo matches the average human jog pace when mapped to steps per second. That mathematical coincidence was used later to design rhythm in Pokemon Go's walking tracks. Celadon City's rooftop layout was drawn first as a pencil maze, the first time a Pokemon city was designed vertically. The rooftop vending machine sprite was borrowed from an old convenience store photo and compressed to 16 colors. Lavender Town's haunting tone wasn't meant to be frightening. It was an experiment in minor keys. The composer called it the sound of standing still. The myth that it caused unease came later, born from how unfamiliar sadness sounded inside a game for children. The Pokemon Tower music fades out by 2 decibels every measure, the only track in the game that naturally lowers itself as it loops. Its final note was tuned half a step sharp to linger like a question. The Pokédex description for Haunter was the first to include humor. The localization team debated whether Loves to Lick was too strange for a ghost, but kept it because it sounded oddly innocent. In Pewter City's museum, the text on the Moonstone display case mentions a meteorite that fell from space. The code name for that object in the internal script is simply Dream. Brock's badge shape was based on a cut diamond drawn from a geology textbook. Each gym leader's badge would follow that model, a real-world mineral simplified into a symbol of trust. Misty's gym pool animation uses a looping blue gradient that repeats every 10 frames, but no 2 players ever see it in sync because it starts the moment they enter the room. That small randomness means each player's water shines differently. Lieutenant Surge's English dialogue was retranslated 3 times to capture his military rhythm. The phrase electric soldier in the Japanese version was changed to electric American only briefly before returning to leader. Erica's flower arrangement in the background tile set was hand-painted with watercolor and scanned into the game. It's one of the only pieces of physical artwork preserved from the original map files. Koga's Poison Gym layout forms the kanji for smoke when viewed from above, a secret pattern the developer confirmed years later. Sabrina's badge was designed to resemble an eye not only for her psychic power, but also because her name in Japanese, Natsume, referenced a famous novelist who wrote about perception. Blaine's Cinnabar Island Gym originally contained puzzles involving Morse code scrapped because they took too long to input. The unused code remains in early script files, translating to "knowledge is heat." Giovanni's office in the Viridian Gym was built with mirror tiles on both sides to simulate the idea that he's always being watched by his own ambition. Team Rocket's logo in the game data is stored as R mark. The mark part refers to a developer's term for sprite transparency. In other words, the team's emblem is literally made of what the game calls empty space. The and ship horn sound effect was borrowed from a real harbor recording taken near Yokohama when the ship departs. The pitch fades upward instead of down, signaling not sadness, but optimism. In Vermilion City, the dockworker NPC was internally named Sailor Dad. His code includes a comment reading, "Waiting for return." No one has confirmed what that line meant. The Vermilion Lighthouse doesn't exist on the overworld map, but appears reflected in the harbor water if the color palette brightens. The team added it as a silent illusion, a detail most never notice. Cerulean Cave's interior layout follows a Fibonacci spiral when plotted on a grid, a natural form of chaos inside an artificial space. The sound of waves in the coastal routes near Fuchsia is not actually a looping audio file. It's a tone generator whose amplitude fluctuates in sync with the Game Boy's processing load, giving it natural irregularity. The Pokemon Center theme plays in a key of C major, but the healing sound itself modulates into F major. The two keys harmonize perfectly, a musical representation of comfort resolving tension. The Pokemart jingle is in the same tempo as the Pokemon Center theme, but in a different time signature. Masuda described it as a friendly disagreement between songs. The in-game clock, used for the Indigo Plateau in later versions, runs 2 minutes slower than other areas. The director said that at the top of the mountain, time feels heavier. The Elite Four's battle backgrounds reuse the same star texture from the title screen, symbolizing that reaching the end brings you back to the beginning. Lorelei's ice chamber lights up in sync with the background melody, one pulse for every measure. Bruno's stone arena glows subtly during his breathing animation, a touch of life and stillness. Agatha's chamber is colored slightly warmer to reflect age rather than malice. Lance's dragon wings in the backdrop flutter every 28 frames, matching heartbeat timing once again. The champion's theme uses the same first 4 notes as the opening title, but inverted, a musical mirror hidden in plain sight. After victory, when the Hall of Fame sequence plays, the game writes a line of code to memory reading. "Thank you, Data." That phrase exists only there and nowhere else in the program. When the credits roll over the Kanto skyline, every building shown corresponds to an actual map tile, not a pre-rendered image. The programmers rebuilt the entire region for that scene, just so it could breathe once more under starlight. The original Kanto Pokédex list ended on number 151, not because of any grand plan, but because memory space allowed exactly that many sprites. Masuda later said the limit felt poetic, so they stopped there intentionally. When the Game Freak team was arranging Pokemon order, they used color swatches pinned to a corkboard to balance the list visually. Grass tones were spaced evenly between fire and water hues, creating a natural rhythm of green, red, and blue that matched the starter trio. The first sprite, drawn after the project name changed from Capsule Monsters to Pokemon, was Oddish. The artist said the round leaves reminded him of music notes and made him smile. The overworld map of Kanto was inspired by a simplified version of the real Kanto region of Japan, flipped horizontally. Saffron City sits roughly where Tokyo would be, and Pallet Town rests where a small seaside neighborhood existed near the developer's childhood home. When the Pokédex description for Nidorino was written, the writer hid his initials in the text spacing. Each line begins with letters that spell his name vertically in Japanese characters. It remains one of the only hidden signatures in the entire Pokédex archive. In Mount Moon, the placement of items inside the cave follows a spiral formation leading upward. The path design mirrors the concept of growth evolution written as geography. The fossils found at the cave's deepest point were drawn by hand with pencil before scanning. Each line of shading still carries the texture of real graphite when viewed through modern emulation magnifiers. The Pokemon Center nurse's hair color was chosen from the same palette as Chansey's egg, binding the two in theme even before dialogue mentioned their connection. The Pokédoll item icon was redrawn more than 20 times until its thread marks looked symmetrical. The artist said, "It should feel handmade even in pixels." Bill's transformation sequence from human to Pokemon was originally animated as a fade out and fade in. The team later decided to slide the sprites horizontally instead because the fade looked too tragic. In the Vermilion Gym, the electric trash can puzzle is built from a 12 by 12 grid that never fully resets. The reason it sometimes feels inconsistent is that one can always remains active, a remnant of the testing script that was never removed. The bicycle shop price of 1 million Pokédollars was chosen as a joke. That number was impossible to reach without hacking. The developer called it the dream we couldn't afford. The early battle engine used the same damage formula as a tabletop RPG the developers used to play on weekends. They adapted it into digital code almost line for line, making Pokemon battles a living memory of their hobby. The trainer defeat fanfare uses an unresolved chord progression. It never lands on its home key, symbolizing that the journey continues even in loss. Inside Silphco, every floor's carpet uses slightly different shades of blue. The artists did this to keep players subconsciously oriented while walking the same logic as modern airport design. The Master Ball color scheme was picked first, before its function existed. The purple represented trust. The pink circle represented human touch. Only afterward did it become the perfect capture tool. In the power plant, the flickering lights follow a pattern of Fibonacci intervals. The rhythm of brightness feels random, but mathematically soothing, like heartbeat irregularity. Route 10's background mountains use an inverted tile of Viridian Forest's trees. That mirroring effect connects the beginning of the player's journey to its electric midpoint, without them ever realizing it. The cycling road theme is the only route music written entirely in 6/8 time. The composer said it was meant to mimic the feeling of coasting downhill forever. Seafoam Islands was designed as a loop instead of a maze. The developers believed players would remember calm repetition better than frustration. The boulders that control water flow form a perfect cross when aligned, a visual of balance and control. The underwater bubble sound effect in that cave was created by shaking a glass of soda next to a microphone. When slowed down, it became ambient ocean noise. Cinnabar Island's burnt-down mansion tells a story entirely through item placement. One hidden note contains the line, "Mew gave birth," a phrase that still unsettles players decades later. The syntax was a direct translation from Japanese, where the line originally read, "Mew was born here." It was meant to sound miraculous, not eerie. The same mansion tile set was used in early drafts for the Pokemon League building, connecting science and ambition through architecture. The move teleport was initially a field-only command. When players asked if it could be used in battle, the programmers simply added a line, "Escape equals true." That single instruction turned an exploration mechanic into a strategic move overnight. In the Pokémart inventory, The potion item's internal description still contains a tag for type beverage. It was coded that way because early prototypes treated healing items like drinks. Pokemon Cry pitch changes between species by altering one hexadecimal value in the sound file. A single-digit difference could transform a roar into a squeak. The Game Boy hardware couldn't play two sound effects at once, so when fainting and level up events occurred simultaneously, one would overwrite the other. Masuda described it as the world choosing which story to finish. The opening title animation was hand-timed with a stopwatch. Developers played the scene repeatedly on the development kit, counting seconds to align the logo flash with the sound. It was a process of pure rhythm, not code. The first time a Pokemon's shadow appeared under its sprite was in Pokemon Stadium. The team said it was to make the creatures feel grounded in reality and spirit. The Pokédex storage system's creator, Bill, was based on a real programmer who built Game Freak's first database. The scriptwriter added humor to make him feel less like a genius and more like a friend. When the credits roll at the end of the game, the final message, "The End," appears only for 3 seconds. This was an intentional choice to avoid melancholy enough time to acknowledge completion, but not linger on it. The bicycle bell tone is mapped to middle C on a piano. It rings exactly twice when pressed, matching the short rhythm of a train crossing bell. In Celadon City's game corner, the slot machines use a pseudo-random number generator seeded by the player's last input. This means luck is partially determined by how long they hesitated before spinning. The coin case full message appears even when you have 0 coins if a glitch overwrites memory. Developers said this error sounded too poetic to fix. The faint reflection effect under the fountains of Celadon's Plaza uses a duplicate layer of the tile sheet shifted by 2 pixels, simple mirroring that became an illusion of water. When the Pokemon League hallway was drawn, one artist placed a single pixel of gold at the door frame to mark the threshold between journey and immortality. It remains visible if the screen contrast is enhanced. The save complete line flashes for exactly half a second longer than other text prompts. Masuda said that delay was intentional to let gratitude linger. The bridge to the Indigo Plateau was drawn with extra vertical pixels to suggest weight beneath your steps. It was one of the first attempts at implied sound without sound effects. The rival's theme music speeds up during the champion battle. The faster tempo is identical to the battle theme of Wild Pokemon, implying that by the end, your rival has become one with nature, no longer just another human opponent. The moment you enter your name at the start of the game, the letters are stored in hexadecimal code that persists across saves. When you delete your file, those characters technically remain in the cartridge's memory until overwritten. Ghost data, sleeping quietly. The cutscene that follows after defeating the champion writes your name into the Hall of Fame memory bank. Each saved name fills a small block of data exactly 16 bytes wide. A cartridge can hold up to 50 Hall of Fame entries before older ones fade like generations of trainers passing on. After the screen fades to black and the music ends, the console continues to hum. That hum, though inaudible, is the last sound of Kanto electricity carrying memory one last time before the world resets to title. The earliest drawing of the Kanto map showed a coastline shaped like a crescent moon. The artist later said he drew it that way because every beginning should hold a little light. When Game Freak first tested Pokeballs opening in darkness, the glow sprite was so bright that it erased half the creature. They dimmed it until the outline of wonder returned. The internal project folder that stored all 151 sprites was titled Friends. Every update was labeled New Friend Found. Pallet Town's houses were colored in opposite palettes, so the rooftops reflected sunrise and sunset. One red, one blue. The color balance mirrored the twin versions themselves. The moment the player takes their first step into Route 1, the background music begins on the offbeat rather than the downbeat. The composer said it felt like tripping forward into adventure. Radata's encounter rate was deliberately high, so players would learn what repetition felt like before rarity. Masuda called it Lesson Zero of Patience. The first Pokédex prototype used paper cards printed with stats. Developers flipped them by hand to simulate scrolling. The animation speed in the final game matches the tempo of that manual shuffle. Inside the code for the Poké Flute is an unused note labeled Rest. It lasts exactly 1 second, a built-in breath that never plays. The cerulean cave walls were colored slightly purple to blend with Mewtwo's palette design, Unity hidden as stone. The Sylph description text includes 2 spaces after the word sea. The writer said the gap was a pause for awe. The Team Rocket hideout staircase turns clockwise because the lead mapper believed evil should always descend with the Sunday. In Saffron City, the elevator doors of Sylphco flicker a single white pixel before opening. It's the same pixel that represents hope during Pokeball capture. The bottle on Giovanni's desk uses the same palette as the potion item. Every shade of healing has a twin in ambition. The original Poké Center tile art had no counter. Players were supposed to walk behind the nurse. Testers kept thinking they were trespassing, so a desk was added as polite distance. Viridian Forest's background noise uses alternating tones intended to sound like crickets. On headphones, it pulses between ears, mimicking the way forest sound wraps around you. Each butterfly that drifts through that forest has a hitbox 1 pixel larger than its body. Catching one on the exact edge of the net always succeeds, a secret kindness from the programmer. The first bridge on Route 2 dips by a single pixel at its center. It was drawn that way to suggest weight wood bending under unseen travelers. The sprite for the fisherman NPC holds his rod at a perfect 45-degree angle. The art director said that number looked most like Quiet Hope. When the Pokédex entry for Magikarp was translated, weak was almost changed to humble. The localizers loved the word but kept the original because humility should be discovered, not stated. The light reflection on Gyarados' scales was painted using only 2 colors and a line of transparency. It gave the illusion of dozens of shades, ferocity built from restraint. Every cave in Kanto plays reverb at a decay rate of exactly 1.5 seconds. It's the sound of a breath returning to its source. The fossil lab on Cinnabar Island uses alternating tiles for its floor. When walked upon in rhythm with the music, the pattern aligns to the downbeats. The map itself keeps time. The gym statues at every entrance share identical geometry, but their bases differ by 1 pixel row. That difference represents each city's ground level on the world map. In the Pokemon League chamber, the statues are mirrored left to right, meaning each one faces the other eternally. The artist called them rivals that never move. The Elite Four hallway columns glow using the same sprite as the Pokémart lights. Even legends need everyday electricity. When the player steps into the champion's room, the battle theme begins 2 beats before the camera settles. The composer described that delay as the inhale before history. The internal file for the credits music is named Goodnight Mid. The Game Boy's sound chip could play only 4 notes at once, so the victory theme hides a rotating algorithm that decides which instrument sings each measure. The code cycles like breathing melody, taking turns to exist. The Hall of Fame screen renders the player's team in the order they were caught, not by level. Memory prefers chronology over strength. When the lights dim at the end of that ceremony, a single frame of white appears between darkness and fade out. That flicker represents flash photography the game could not show. After the final scene, pressing any button does nothing for exactly 3 seconds. That pause isn't a bug, it's a silent bow. In the Japanese manual, the final page shows Pikachu sleeping under stars. The caption reads simply, "See you tomorrow." Every remake since then hides a similar image somewhere, sometimes a photo, sometimes a sprite, as if the franchise itself remembers to rest. The save file structure in the original cartridges contains a line of unused bytes labeled Dream Space. Nobody outside the studio knows what they were meant for. The internal checksum that confirms data integrity was jokingly called Guardian Mew. If corrupted values appear, the Guardian wakes and repairs them. When Masuda reflected on finishing the first game, he said the quiet after release felt like standing on Route 1 again. Wind, grass, nothing else. Decades later, when the Switch remakes were in testing, an intern noticed the same breeze coded into the opening sound layer. The engineer smiled and said, "It's still morning in palette." The earliest Pokemon logo sketch wasn't yellow or blue. It was drawn in pencil on thin tracing paper, the word looping like handwriting. The dots inside the letters represented stars. The artist said they were meant to look like dust left behind by adventure. When Game Freak moved offices during Red and Blue's late development, the boxes containing design sketches were labeled Creatures. The name stuck, and Creatures Incorporated became part of Pokemon's official lineage. The title screen of Red and Green features Nidorino battling Gengar, but the animation was added before the developers even finished implementing type advantages. At that moment, it was just two sprites meeting an empty space potential without logic. That animation loops slightly unevenly, skipping 2 frames at the start of each reset. It gives the illusion that the world flickers, as if waking up again every time you press start. The background of Professor Oak's lab is colored warmer than every other indoor map. It was designed that way so players' first human contact in the game would feel safe. The Choose Your Starter animation was meant to show the Pokeballs trembling slightly before you pick one. Limited hardware forced the team to remove that motion, but it stayed coded as an invisible flag that still triggers, unseen. When the player first steps into tall grass and Oak appears to stop them, the camera's scroll speed increases by 1 unit to mimic surprise. The line, "It's unsafe out there," was originally written as, "You shouldn't rush alone." The rival's default name, Blue, isn't stored as a word, but as a sequence of sound IDs, the first letters of battle cries stitched together. Every rival since has inherited that template, meaning all of them are technically echoes of that one voice. In the Pokédex, the entry number font was made intentionally bold to give weight to the sense of discovery. The artist said he wanted it to look like a little medal every time you caught something new. Inside Mount Moon, there's a single rock sprite shaped differently from the others, positioned at the map's center. When asked about it, one mapper simply said, "Because every mountain needs a heart." Kanto's original bridge tiles were coded using water graphics beneath the surface. That's why the faint ripple sound continues underfoot. Even solid ground remembers the sea. The caves that connect Pewter and Cerulean were almost filled with fog to hide their short length. The plan was abandoned after the Game Boy couldn't handle transparency. Instead, the developers left the rooms dark, but clean honesty through simplicity. The color palette used for grass tiles was mixed from real pigment values. The artist went outside, held up blades of grass, and matched them to hexadecimal codes under daylight. The reason the Pokeball icon blinks when saving is because the designers wanted a heartbeat. The rhythm of that flash matches the tempo of the Pokemon Center theme. When Red and Blue released internationally, some sprites had to be redrawn to look friendlier. Golbat's huge open mouth was reduced in size because test audiences thought it looked like it was screaming. The original Japanese version of Jinx had a solid black face, inspired by a theater costume called Kuroko, but localization teams recolored it purple after realizing it could be misinterpreted. Rhydon's sprite was the very first drawn and the last edited, bookending the project. The internal file number 000 still belongs to it, a silent nod to where everything began. Pikachu's backstripes were added halfway through development to make it recognizable from behind. Before that, it was mistaken for Clefairy in early tests. The Pokédex entry for Clefairy mentions moonlight not because of lore, but because the team had designed a lunar-themed evolution chain that was later scrapped. Only the line remained, a whisper of something never seen. Vulpix's tail count increased from 5 to 6 late in development because the even number looked better spinning during animation. Its evolution, Ninetales, was drawn by the same artist who designed Rapidash. Both were meant to symbolize energy in motion. The in-game trade in Vermilion City that offers you a Farfetch'd was meant as a joke. The trade's name, Ducks, is a pun on the word duck. The translator left it as is, amused that it sounded like a nickname a child would make up. The Safari Zone's warden, who famously cannot speak, was originally written with full dialogue that hinted at a lost love of travel. The developers removed it, saying silence told the story better. The sign next to the warden's house still contains a grammatical error, Slowpoke instead of Slowpokes. It has never been corrected in any re-release, left as a deliberate echo of the past. The Fossil Revival Machine animation uses the same visual effect as the Pokeball opening sequence. The choice was intentional. Both represent transformation through energy inside the power plant. The sprite for Zapdos appears surrounded by electricity tiles that never touch its outline. The artist said that gap was where air becomes fear. Every Pokeball sprite rotates clockwise during capture except in the Mewtwo battle, where it spins counterclockwise to symbolize resistance. The hidden truck near the SS Anne was placed there as a test tile never meant to be seen. The myth of Mew hiding beneath it began entirely from imagination, a rare case where the community's dream became canon. When Game Freak remade Kanto years later, they left the truck exactly where it was. They said removing it would feel like erasing a memory. The background of the Indigo Plateau's entryway contains a faint star pattern reused from the title screen. The idea was to remind players that reaching the end of the journey was a return to the beginning starlight. To Starlight, the credits theme in Red and Blue and the lullaby in the Pokemon Center share the same chord progression, just slowed and inverted. The structure means that resting and finishing are musically the same emotion. When Masuda was asked what the last sound he added to the game was, he said, "The ocean." It was coded into Route 21's background noise as a quiet fade, looping forever beyond the map's edge. In the Japanese debug build, there's a hidden message that displays, if you wander off the map too far, you've gone where no one drew. The English version replaced it with a soft freeze, no words, only silence, which might be the truest possible ending. And somewhere in the unused data, between sprites and scripts, lies a single line that simply reads, "Thank you for finding us." Every region that followed Kanto began its planning around a single idea left behind in the original notes: "The world should fit in your pocket." That phrase became a design compass, scribbled at the top of each new map draft for decades afterward. The color palettes for Johto's forests were drawn directly from Kanto's Viridian tiles, but shaded slightly cooler to suggest distance. When players crossed between them in gold and silver, that subtle hue shift made the journey feel like walking into memory. In early drafts of Hoenn, the developers reused the rock pattern from Mount Moon as the base layer for its caves. The pattern was then rotated 90 degrees, symbolically turning the past on its side. Sinnoh's snow tiles were mapped over Kanto's water tile code. The programmer responsible said, "The same data can freeze or flow, depending on how you see it." The Victory Road layout in Unova contains a hidden reference to Kanto's design. Its final staircase mirrors the Indigo Plateaus by tile count and height. The mapper said it was a way of bowing to our first mountain. Kalos's glowing city lights use the same starfield algorithm as the ending of Red and Blue. The artist who implemented it had joined Game Freak as a child fan of Kanto, fulfilling a quiet circle. Alola's beaches include shells that share sprite DNA with the fossils of Kanto, reused and recolored so that history becomes sand. Galar's forests hide a near-invisible echo of Viridian music layered under the new theme. It fades in at a volume of 2%, audible only if you lower all other channels, a secret heartbeat of nostalgia. Even in Paldea, the open fields use randomized grass densities patterned after Route 1's algorithm. The lead designer said, "Every journey still begins in the grass." The Pokédex number system remains anchored to Kanto's original 151. Every new region must mathematically fit around it, as if the first chapter set the heartbeat for all that came after. Pikachu's cry, though remade dozens of times, always begins with the same frequency spike from the Game Boy sample. It's the last remaining soundbite, untouched since 1996. In Pokémon Yellow, Pikachu's walking animation required the developers to create an entirely new script that layered sprite data over the player model. That experiment later evolved into following Pokémon in future generations' companionship, born from a single tail wag. The fishing mechanic in every mainline title still uses the same success rate algorithm as it did in Kanto, with one change. The fail sound pitch rises slightly each generation, a subtle metaphor for patience becoming hope. When the internal team built Pokémon Stadium, they imported the original Kanto cries as placeholders. The engineers decided they sounded too nostalgic to replace, so they kept the raw samples, simply cleaning static from the edges. The Pokéball capture sequence in 3D titles still follows the same shake intervals established on the Game Boy: 1 second, then 1, 2, then 1.6. Masuda said he kept that pattern because players recognize timing by feeling, not memory. The modern Poké Centers in Scarlet and Violet play an ambient hum in C major, the same key as the Kanto Center's melody, only with digital wind layered on top, as if technology had learned to breathe. In Kanto's debug notes, one developer wrote, "The game should feel like the world is smiling at you." That line resurfaced years later as a motto during Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee's development, still handwritten in the project's internal documents. The 3D Pokédex models in Sun and Moon were measured to match the exact pixel proportions of their original 2D sprites. That's why, when scaled side by side, even enormous creatures retain the same emotional size they once had on a 2-inch screen. Every Pokemart since Generation 1 has played a variation of the same jingle. The composer once said, "I like to think that tune is how money sounds when it's honest." When players use Fly in modern games, the wind distortion that fades in after takeoff is still labeled in the code as Pidgey Wave. It's the same placeholder name used in Red and Blue, unedited, just migrated. The original map of Kanto contained an unused patch of ocean to the south of Pallet Town labeled Future. Some believe it was meant for a scrapped region connection. Others think it was just optimism turned into code. The developers of Heart Gold and Soul Silver left the Kanto soundtrack completely unchanged, except for one detail. The pitch of the Poke Flute theme was raised half a note to sound a little more awake. The faint animation added in Generation 3 was based on how children would drop their Game Boys onto their laps when losing a battle. The motion was mimicked to reflect that same resigned softness. When the Pokemon Company created the first official Pokeball toy, they recorded the closing sound directly from the Red and Blue capture sample. The real-world product literally echoes the game's heartbeat. In interviews, Sugimori once said that every Pokemon he designed had a little silence inside them. He meant that even the loudest designs should contain a place where they could rest. In Pokemon Fire Red and Leaf Green, the background of the player's bedroom includes a GameCube, but in the memory file, it's still labeled NES. The past lingers in code, unchanged even as the world modernized. Every single sprite of a Kanto Pokemon appears at least once in official media since 1996. Not one has been forgotten, a record of continuity no other fictional world can claim. The Pokédex lines about migration in Pidgey and Spearow were meant to mirror real-world Sparrow research the lead writer's father conducted. Science quietly turned into story. Nidoran's gender split marked the first time a game ever used the male and female symbols as characters in data. They were drawn by hand, each pixel arranged like a smile. Clefairy's connection to the moon inspired the inclusion of lunar cycles in later titles. The phase of the moon during certain events in Diamond and Pearl directly ties back to that first myth of moonlight as home. On the night the original games went gold, the developers gathered in a small Tokyo apartment to watch the opening screen one last time. They took turns pressing start. Someone said, "We did it," and another whispered, "Now they can dream." The global Pokédex entry numbers, always beginning at 1, serve as both anchor and prayer. They remind every new region that adventure must always begin small, with wonder disguised as routine. To this day, when you open the Pokédex in any modern game, the flicker of white light that fills the screen for half a second is still called Cantaglow. It's coded deep in the engine, impossible to rename without breaking everything built above it. And somewhere inside that pulse, hidden between the sound channels and the sprite layers, lives the quiet idea that started it all, that the world is vast, but home fits inside your hands. The world of Kanto was small by modern standards, but it was designed to feel infinite. The space between Pallet Town and Viridian Forest measured less than half a mile in-game, yet players remembered it as a vast horizon. The developers said they built illusion through rhythm, repeating music loops, and alternating textures to stretch imagination instead of distance. Each Pokemon introduced there carried a fragment of natural philosophy. The Pokédex wasn't meant as a book of monsters, but as a diary of coexistence. Bulbasaur's vines symbolized adaptation, Charmander's flame represented will, and Squirtle's shell was protection through patience. Together, they embodied the 3 pillars of the series' heart: growth, endurance, and empathy. In concept art, Caterpie's green tones were chosen to evoke childhood comfort. Its evolution into Butterfree, with soft lavender wings, was the team's metaphor for innocence transforming into possibility. The idea that even the smallest creature could become beautiful became a quiet thesis for Pokemon as a whole. Weedle's horn was drawn longer than biologically possible to look slightly dangerous, a reminder that nature contains both gentleness and defense. The same artist who designed it later drew Onyx, reversing that balance by giving the giant stone serpent small, kind eyes. When they created Pikachu, its cheeks were meant to glow only in dark environments. The Game Boy's screen couldn't handle that effect, but the idea remained. Every later depiction from anime sparks to digital particles carries that original dream of light, appearing only when it's needed. Raichu's tail was inspired by Japanese calligraphy strokes, curling upward like a brush flick at the end of a word. The artist said he wanted its silhouette to look like punctuation, an exclamation that smiled. Sandshrew's scales were drawn from tessellated geometric tiles, making it one of the few Pokemon literally built from math. Its evolution, Sandslash, extends that idea into chaos, geometry breaking free from perfect symmetry. When Clefable was designed, its wings were meant to resemble unfinished paper folds. The soft edges gave it an otherworldly innocence. It was the first Pokemon coded to walk instead of hop, making its movement feel deliberate, almost shy. Vulpix's tails were shaded to move, as if blown by wind that never touched the world. The programmer called this silent motion, a trick that made the Game Boy world feel alive without sound. The line between Zubat and Golbat was one of the earliest tests of transformation. Developers described the evolution process as a story told through pixels. The idea that change could be seen rather than simply stated became a cornerstone for every region that followed. Oddish and Gloom were born from the concept of dual nature, beauty, and decay. Their contrasting designs symbolized how all growth carries shadow. Vileplume's petals were shaded to look heavy, as though bending under their own color. When Meowth was drawn, the gold charm on its head was meant to symbolize human greed, but the wide grin represented acceptance. The duality between desire and humor gave it longevity across cultures. Psyduck's headaches, often used for comedy, originated from a developer's note about migraines during crunch time. The joke softened the pain, turning frustration into relatability. Machop's muscle lines were outlined using the same pencil technique as early Street Fighter concept art. That crossover of style between industries helped define the look of strength in Japanese pop culture for years. Bellsprout's head design was modeled on a traditional clay whistle. It was hollow by intention, representing simplicity as power. Its final evolution, Victory Bell, was drawn as a carnivorous inversion, the gentle plant turned hungry, proof that extremes exist in every ecosystem. Geodude was the first Pokemon created to test gravity simulation on the Game Boy. Its bouncing animation used the same timing formula as Mario's jump physics. When Slowpoke was coded, its delayed reaction time wasn't just a joke. It came from a literal programming bug that caused one sprite to appear a second late. The team laughed and decided to keep it forever. Magnemite's orbiting screws rotate on different axes than its magnets. That imperfection creates the illusion of mechanical hum when no sound plays. Farfetch'd was built around a proverb that roughly translates to a duck carrying its own leak. It's an idiom meaning something too convenient, which made it an inside joke about predictable game design. Doduo's running animation alternates leg frames too quickly for the human eye to track, giving the illusion of stillness in motion. Masuda described it as a sprint through serenity. Seal's cry was taken from an edited baby seal recording, sped up and filtered until it sounded like laughter. The decision came from a belief that creatures of ice should sound cheerful, not cold. Grimer's slime texture was coded using the same randomization that generated water ripples in caves. That's why it moves like living liquid. Its evolution, muck, doubles the pattern density chaos layered over chaos. Shelder's tongue color was chosen specifically to contrast Gengar's purple. The team wanted visual balance between sea and shadow. Drowsy's design came from the tapir of Japanese folklore, said to eat dreams. The original Pokédex draft described it as guardian of forgotten thoughts, but the phrase was cut for length. Executor's coconut heads each use slightly different smiles, reflecting the idea of shared consciousness. In the animation data, every head blinks independently, like members of a choir breathing between verses. Hitmonlee's name combines Bruce Lee's kick speed with a play on Japanese onomatopoeia for impact. Hitmonchan, modeled on Jackie Chan's fluid movement, was given curved gloves to symbolize motion turning into grace. Lickitung's tongue texture has the same color ID as Slowpoke's body. It was reused for efficiency, creating a hidden kinship between two seemingly unrelated Pokemon. Rhyhorn's rocky plating uses a repeated zigzag pattern that also appears in Onyx's tail-shared fossils of design evolution. Kangaskhan's pouch was drawn to look like a cradle. The baby's sprite reuses the same eye design as Cubone, implying a possible family connection never confirmed in canon. Horsia's bubble attack animation was one of the first to use real particle behavior. Each bubble bounces with unique weight. Developers called it baby physics. Goldine's fins were inspired by the flowing sleeves of traditional kimono dancers. Its evolution, Seeking, exaggerates that motion to resemble a final bow. Staryu's core gem pulses at the same tempo as the Pokemon Center's healing animation. It was meant to feel like the heart of the ocean, beating in rhythm with recovery. Scyther's wings were modeled on praying mantis limbs, but layered with transparent pixels to create the illusion of speed. Its evolution, Scizor, was drawn entirely in straight lines to represent technology, sharpening nature. Pinsir's horns were carved in clay, first to test how light would hit their ridges. The model still sits in a display case at Game Freak Studio, labeled Beast of Balance. Tauros was originally planned to share a female counterpart called Taurina. The design was scrapped late in development because storage space ran out. The Pokédex entries about its herd behavior were kept as an echo of that missing partner. Magikarp's splash animation was used to calibrate water reflections. In every later game, the joke move accidentally became a physics standard. Gyarados' rage theme, described as destruction born from patience, became a template for designing legendary personalities in future generations. Lapras's ability to understand human speech was added after one writer described it as the voice you hear when traveling too long. The entry was meant to sound poetic, not literal. Ditto's transformation code allows it to copy sprites pixel by pixel, but only from loaded memory. That limitation is why it can't become Pokemon that haven't been encountered. Even mimicry requires experience. Eevee's branching evolutions were a programming miracle at the time. The internal file labeled it Experiment, fittingly, as its DNA system was unlike any other. Porygon's creation story reflected Game Freak itself, artificial life, born from digital boundaries. The developers called it the Pokemon that became aware of the grid. Snorlax was the final normal type coded into the Kanto Index, ending the list not with violence but with sleep. Its calm became the tone of an entire generation. And when Mewtwo's chamber closes behind you in Cerulean Cave, the faint echo you hear before the music fades isn't random noise. It's a slowed down version of the first cry in the Pokédex Bulbasaur's, completing the circle from creation to evolution, from start to rest. In that single echo, every step through tall grass, every pixel of shadow and light folds into silence. The screen goes dark, the player exhales, and the world for just a moment is still. When the first concept sketches for the Pokemon world were drawn, the artists didn't think of regions, only feelings. One designer described Kanto as a sunrise in code, a place that would always feel like morning. The warm color palettes, soft edges, and minimal architecture were all chosen to evoke the sense of waking up inside a dream you already understood. The earliest sprites were created on graph paper, each square filled in by pencil before being transcribed into hexadecimal values. Each sheet represented a Pokemon's body, its pose, and its shadow. Those pages were later scanned and layered into the game, meaning every creature from that first generation still carries the touch of real graphite behind its pixels. The Pokédex data for each entry was stored in blocks of 128 bytes. The developers joked that the Pokemon didn't live in the cartridge, but slept inside those numbers until the player found them. That phrasing became a secret motto during long nights of debugging. Let them sleep until discovery. The evolution of trading mechanics began not from design, but from necessity. Early Game Boys couldn't handle all 151 creatures in one cartridge, so the link cable became a bridge, not just between devices, but between friends. The team later said that discovery through sharing was more important than the monsters themselves. The shape of the link cable's connector inspired the silhouette of the Mega Evolution Stones decades later. The idea of connection energy moving between trainers had never really left the series. The first shiny Pokemon created internally was not Gyarados, but a gold-colored Magikarp used to test alternate palettes. The engineers loved the contrast so much, they added a line of code to preserve its color probability, ensuring that one day players might meet a miracle in red. The Pokemon cries were all synthesized on a single workstation in Suganami, Tokyo. Each sound was made from a bass sine wave stretched through distortion and pitch filters. When a developer described a cry as cute, the waveform would stay simple. When they described it as mysterious, they would add echoes. The entire soundscape of Kanto was built from human adjectives translated into numbers. The overworld music was written to fill silence rather than create rhythm. Masuda said, "Children will hum when they are happy. I wanted the world to hum back." The Route 1 melody, gentle and repetitive, loops in a perfect 8-bar cycle with no dissonant notes, the musical equivalent of calm breathing. When the Pokemon League logo was designed, the artist used the same circular layout as the Pokeball symbol. The message was quiet but intentional. Competition and capture were reflections of each other. The champion was simply the last person still holding on. The term trainer was chosen after weeks of debate. Some preferred breeder, others keeper, but trainer implied growth for both human and Pokemon, suggesting a shared journey rather than ownership. The choice of red and blue as version titles came from the Japanese flag's colors. The developers said the games were meant to represent the balance between energy and calm, two halves of one spirit. In the West, those colors accidentally echoed rivalry, transforming meaning through culture. Professor Oak's lab background was modeled after real photographs of a science classroom near the team's office. The scattered books, the chalkboard, the windows facing the morning sun, all were based on an actual room where children sometimes peeked inside to watch the developers work. The line "Your journey begins now" was written into the English manual because the developers felt that the first screen lacked a spoken blessing. They wanted every player to feel as though someone older, wiser, and unseen had whispered those words. The map of Kanto fits perfectly inside a square 128 tiles wide. The same ratio is used in modern games for the smallest town boundaries. That structure became tradition even when map sizes grew infinitely larger. The fishing rods in the original games were designed with alternating pixel bands to simulate wood grain. When moved one frame at a time, they created a gentle shimmer, giving players the sense of light dancing on water. The reason water tiles in Kanto were drawn lighter near edges was to mimic depth, not realism, but reassurance. The artist said the ocean should look safe to step near, not endless. When the game saves, the Pokeball icon flashes 3 times. Those 3 flashes represent capture, connection, and continuation, a trilogy of motion that silently defined the series' structure. The team used the same internal file name prefix for every image asset, FR. It stood for friend. Every file, from Charizard to Caterpie, begins with that label in the code, a reminder that even data was meant to feel personal. In the debug build, there was once a menu called Dream Mode. It allowed testers to warp anywhere instantly. The feature was cut before release, but the code for that phrase still exists. Dormant and unreachable, a ghost of convenience left behind. When the Kanto region was later remade in color, one developer spent an entire week choosing the exact hue of Pallet Town's grass. The chosen green contained traces of yellow and blue, a symbolic nod to the 2 versions that had started everything. The save file data includes a hidden checksum labeled Hope. When corruption occurs, the file tries to rebuild from that value. The team didn't plan for poetic symbolism, but it's hard not to see it there. And deep inside, the cartridge memory, beneath layers of tiles and music and code, the first unused line ever written still reads, "For those who believed a small screen could hold a world." The internal build of Pokemon Red and Green contained a debug item called the Magic Candy. It instantly leveled up a Pokemon to 100, though the game could not display the number properly. On screen, it simply read Max, a placeholder that would later inspire the rare candy's design. When the sprite for the Master Ball was drawn, its top shell was slightly misaligned with the bottom half. Instead of fixing it, the artist left the imperfection, saying it made the object feel handmade, as if even perfection had seams. In the earliest Pokédex notes, Nidorino and Nidorina were listed under the same number with a male and female sign beside them. The team debated whether they should be one species, but the system could not handle gendered stats yet. The dual listing became a historical accident that shaped the future of breeding mechanics. The programmers tested the concept of critical hits by creating a hidden variable called luck. Each Pokemon species had a hidden value between 1 and 10 that affected its chances. Later, they discovered the formula could overflow, resulting in hits that exceeded the intended damage cap. That mistake gave rise to the dramatic one-hit knockouts that players still remember. The first translation documents were written on fax paper with handwritten English words penciled over Japanese code. The translators described their task as turning emotion into math and back into emotion. Inside the internal art book, Pikachu's earliest name appears as Pikachun. The small syllable chun means tiny mouse squeak. It was removed late in localization because the team thought it sounded too childish for Western markets. The Elite Four chambers were built using duplicate tiles from Silphco to save memory. The layout was reversed so that instead of rising up, players descended inward, symbolically traveling deeper into mastery rather than above it. In the Japanese release, the credits included the phrase, "Thank you for playing." In the English version, the same text was translated literally but recentered on screen. The decision to move it upward slightly was made so the sentence would feel like it was looking toward the stars. The bicycle speed value in code is exactly twice the player's normal walking rate, not counting diagonal movement. However, the camera scroll speed does not double, it rises by 1 point less, making motion appear smoother than true speed. That slight imbalance became the secret to the game's comforting sense of momentum. When the Pokemon Center's healing jingle was composed, Masuda wrote it as an 8-note melody meant to mimic the sound of a small bell ringing twice. The timing between the notes was measured by tapping on a desk, rhythmically, not by using a metronome. The PC storage boxes each have 20 slots because that was the maximum number that could fit before the Game Boy's memory overflowed. The developers joked that players would never fill them all. They underestimated curiosity. Each city in Kanto was given a color-based name to unify the map through palette themes: lavender, pewter, vermilion, cerulean, celadon, fuchsia, all chosen to sound both natural and poetic. Only Pallet Town broke the pattern, its name meaning blank canvas, a place meant to hold every color that followed. The Team Rocket bass theme uses the same rhythm as the gym leader battle music, but in a lower key. The composer said it represented courage turned inward, heroism seen through fear. When the Safari Zone was tested, one developer accidentally threw a safari ball at another trainer sprite. The game froze, but the log recorded the moment as encounter, human. The line still exists in the old code. The term Pokemon itself began as a contraction of pocket monsters, but the decision to stylize it with an accented A came later. The accent mark was added so that English speakers would pronounce it with a rising tone, Pokémon, which sounded friendlier than Pokémonday. The Game Boy's hardware could only render 4 shades of green, so the artists treated each pixel like brushwork. The darker tones became outlines, the lighter tones became air. This limitation taught them to use shape over color, a discipline that defined the art style for generations. The bridge sprites across Kanto all share one hidden tile beneath them, a single water block coded as 001, meaning origin. It ensures every bridge has a foundation, even when invisible. The game's internal clock doesn't exist in the original versions, but a fake timer counts steps. That invisible number powers things like egg hatching in later generations. In a way, time in Pokemon began as movement, not minutes. The memory address that holds your player name in the cartridge is located directly next to the code for the Hall of Fame data. It means your identity as a trainer is stored right beside the record of victory, the self and its legend occupying the same space. When the international release of Pokemon Blue was finalized, the developers changed the watercolor to a brighter hue. They said the ocean should look more alive, less lonely. The ending scene where birds fly across the sky was made by looping the Pidgey sprite with adjusted shadows. Each frame uses slightly different wing angles, giving the illusion that they rise with the wind. The programmer said he wanted the ending to feel like breathing. The final bug fixed before release was a memory leak caused by the Pokédex scrolling too quickly. Every crash resulted in a scrambled screen that looked like static stars. Someone on the team said maybe the game just didn't want to end. The entire world of Kanto fits into less than 1 megabyte of data. Inside that space are forests, cities, caves, waves, and over 100 lives, a reminder that vastness is not measured by size, but by the quiet feeling of returning home. The first sketch of the Pokeball's interior showed a tiny suspended platform meant to hold the creature's essence. The artist described it as a soft light cradle. The animation team couldn't replicate that detail on the Game Boy, but the concept lingered the idea that every Pokeball was not a cage, but a moment of stillness. The reason every Pokeball flashes once before closing is to symbolize heartbeat synchronization. In development notes, that frame was literally labeled Bond. When the designers began drawing gym leaders, they each chose a word to describe their personality before touching paper. Brock's was foundation, Misty's was flow, Erica's was grace, Sabrina's was control, Koga's was smoke, Blaine's was spark, Giovanni's was power. Each sprite was shaded according to that word's emotional tone. The badges you receive were originally meant to function as keys, unlocking hidden doors instead of increasing obedience levels. The idea was scrapped because it felt too restrictive, but the visual metaphor remained progress built on recognition. The Pokemart clerk sprite wears blue to contrast the nurse's pink, creating a complementary cycle between health and economy. Those colors became the base palette for the entire interface. When the first battle sprites were being tested, the designers realized that large creatures like Onyx and Dragonite couldn't fit in a single tile grid. Instead of shrinking them, they overlapped pixels across borders, technically breaking the game's rendering rules. That rebellion is still visible in their outline strength that refuses to fit within boundaries. Each move animation was given a sound frequency signature to match its type. Fire attacks used rising tones, water attacks descending tones, and electric moves alternated irregularly. The imbalance between tones was deliberate. Masuda said that true energy should sound imperfect. The reason critical hits make a sharper tone is because the sound file was played backward. That small reversal gave the sensation of shock without adding new data. In the code, the sleep status effect is written as dream. The developers thought the word was gentler and chose to leave it that way, even in technical notation. The early prototype of Lavender Town used brighter colors, but testers described it as too happy for its theme. When they darkened the palette, the composer rewrote the music in a minor key to match. The resulting track is mathematically perfect for inducing relaxation, a pattern of harmonic intervals that lowers tension subconsciously. The Haunted Tower in Lavender Town was designed using the same map layout as Celadon's department store, but mirrored vertically. It represents the concept of commerce, reversed buying and selling traded for loss and remembrance. Mr. Fuji's sprite was drawn taller than most NPCs because his design was based on the perspective of a child looking upward. He was meant to feel protective, even in silence. The Pokemon Tower's top floor uses the same tile data as the Indigo Plateau's Champion Room, symbolically linking rest with victory. In the original notes, that was labeled Peace and Pride, the same emotion. Ghastly's gas cloud was the first transparency effect used in the game. The programmer said it was inspired by breath on cold glass. Its flickering edges repeat an exact rhythm with the player's step counter, like a shadow that follows motion itself. Cubone's skull was initially drawn too large for its body, so the sprite was redrawn 3 times. The final version kept a single misplaced pixel from the earlier draft as an homage to the original design, a scar in miniature. When the team built the Safari Zone, they used leftover tiles from Fuchsia City's garden map. The ponds and fences were placed without strict planning, only by feel. That natural randomness later became the foundation for the series' future nature reserves. The Good Rod and Super Rod are coded with the same base function, but the Super Rod delays the bite sound by one extra frame to create suspense. The developers said it was meant to teach patience, disguised as tension. The internal code name for the bicycle theme was Wind. The composer said it should sound like speed without pressure. He later reused its melody in a lullaby arrangement, played during staff events music, meant to sound like freedom exhaling. Articuno, Zapdos, and Moltres all share the same wing animation template, only the flame overlay and color channels differ. The suffixes uno, dos, and tres were added at the last minute as a multilingual Easter egg, suggested by a translator who wanted to make counting sound mystical. Moltres' fire effect consists of 3 alternating colors that blend into a 4th illusionary hue not actually coded in the palette. That phantom tone appears only because the Game Boy refresh rate flickers between 2 adjacent reds faster than the human eye can follow. When the internal lore described Mewtwo's creation, the document called it Child of Ambition. The phrasing was poetic but simple, a reminder that Kanto's greatest power was born from curiosity rather than cruelty. Mew's placeholder sprite was nothing more than 6x6 pixels of rounded shapes. It was added so late in development that it wasn't listed in the official index. That absence turned into legend, a ghost in code that sparked wonder for decades. The Hall of Fame's flashing effect uses the same code as the Poke Flute animation, a loop of brightness fading to dark. Masuda described it as a breath drawn between gratitude and silence. The words, "the end," at the conclusion of the game were positioned in the lower center rather than the middle of the screen. That offset was intentional. It left visual space above, as though to suggest the story was still continuing somewhere beyond. After the credits fade out, the background color of the screen lingers for half a second longer than the music. The programmer timed it that way so players wouldn't feel that the world disappeared instantly, but rather drifted into sleep. The file header of Pokemon Red contains a string of unused text that reads, "We made this with care. No one outside the team was ever meant to see it, but it remains embedded inside every copy." And in the source material for the debug manual, one final note is handwritten in the corner. "If you find joy here, you've already won." The world of Kanto was not drawn as a continent, but as a circle. In early sketches, the roads connected like spokes around the center point, where the Pokemon League would eventually rise. The cartographers said they wanted travel to feel like returning home, not like reaching an end. Each town was built around a single emotional theme. Palette represented beginnings, pewter endurance, cerulean curiosity, vermilion ambition, celadon prosperity, fuchsia playfulness, saffron intelligence, cinnabar risk, and lavender memory. Every location's colors, music, and architecture reinforced its feeling a map, not of geography, but of mood. The grass on Route 1 contains exactly 12 shades of green. The artist layered them by hand so the landscape would shimmer like real sunlight through movement. This technique became the foundation of the series' sense of life stillness that feels like breathing. The fences that line the roads are all drawn 1 pixel higher than needed. That single line of extra height was meant to mimic perspective, the illusion that the player's viewpoint comes slightly from above, as if watching their own memory. The rock tunnels in Kanto were designed using repeating diamond shapes, each one representing stability through repetition. The lead mapper said the caves were supposed to teach navigation by feeling, not by map. Every hidden item buried in the world follows an internal rule: 2 steps off the main path, 1 step to the right. Players discovered this unintentionally, but the designers said it was deliberate, a pattern of reward for curiosity. The Pokeball's capture animation uses alternating frames of white and light gray to symbolize pulse. The same flash pattern appears in the game's saving process, quietly linking life and memory. The potion item's description file originally included a note that read, "Safe for all creatures." That text was never meant to appear in-game, but was left as a reminder that the world's tone should always be gentle, even in its battles. The city music across Kanto all shares the same hidden melody line, reversed in key or tempo. If you overlap them digitally, the result forms a complete song, a piece of music never officially released, hidden in the code like a lullaby, divided into towns. When the Pokemart inventory was designed, developers gave each item a symbolic price. The cost of a Pokeball at 200 represented accessibility. The cost of a Hyper Potion at 1200 represented hope through effort. Every number was chosen to feel earned, not arbitrary. The underground paths were inspired by Tokyo's subway corridors. The lighting pattern was drawn from memory, based on a single walk home one rainy night. The lead designer said the flickering tiles were meant to feel like solitude that still feels safe. Kanto's doors all open in the same direction, left to right. This consistency was intentional, based on the belief that comfort comes from predictability. When later regions began mixing orientations, the team debated for weeks before deciding that variation now represented growth. Every Pokemon Center carpet is tinted slightly toward red, because red symbolizes warmth, blood, and return. The tiles reflect the heartbeat pattern of the healing animation, even when no one is standing there. The S. Anne's design was modeled after an actual cruise liner catalog the developers found in a travel magazine. The real ship's name was Saint Anne. That detail was kept as homage, though no one involved ever boarded it. Inside the ship, the trash bins contain random items because the original item placement script bugged out. The programmers kept it anyway, saying that scavenging was part of the adventure's realism, the world giving rewards to those who looked closely. The elevator in Sylph Co. uses a sound pitch that matches the Pokemon Center door chime. Both represent transition movement between safety and challenge. The bicycles parked outside buildings were added near the end of development, purely for decoration. Each was positioned by hand with no collision data. The artist said they symbolized trainers who came before you, invisible travelers who left quietly. When Cinnabar Island's volcano erupted in later games, the internal code reused tile data from Viridian Forest's burnt trees. That decision was poetic, linking beginning and end. Green life turned to ash, still remembered by the same pixels. The gym interiors all use similar floor tiles, but with different shadow placements. The art team said shadows should fall toward the player, so they always look like they're moving forward into light. The Victory Road caves were designed to feel like rhythm challenge followed by stillness, strength followed by echo. The cave's longest hallway contains exactly 151 steps from start to finish, a coincidence so perfect that the developers chose not to alter it. The Indigo Plateau was built as a mirror image of Pallet Town. Both contain a Poke Center and a mart, placed in the same positions, as though the story ends exactly where it began, a circle closed by experience. The background clouds that scroll behind the Hall of Fame are reused from the title screen, but slowed by half. The artist said that the world's final image should move at the pace of rest. And inside that slow drift of sky, one pixel of brighter blue remains static, the place where the player once began, still shining through every journey that followed. Kanto was built on limits, and those limits became art. The developers often said that boundaries gave them freedom. With less than 1 megabyte to hold a world, they learned that suggestion was stronger than detail. Every tree was a symbol, every pixel a hint. The imagination of the player filled the gaps, turning minimalism into mythology. When later regions were designed, the artists would return to Kanto's maps for proportion. Each new town still follows the same distance ratio between center and mart, between road and rest. Those measurements, invisible to players, became a kind of heartbeat that defined comfort. In Johto's remakes, the route numbers continue Kanto's sequence, not just for convenience, but to represent continuity. The idea was that the world had always been whole, it was only revealed piece by piece. The programmers said, "Every new game is not a sequel, it's a widening horizon." The color red, chosen for the first version, symbolized energy, courage, and youth. The color blue symbolized reflection and calm. Their relationship became the core philosophy of the franchise, passion balanced by thought, action softened by wonder. Every Pokemon generation after that quietly echoes Kanto's elemental trio, not through fire, water, and grass alone, but through narrative. In Hoenn, it was land, sea, and sky. In Sinnoh, time, space, and origin. In Kalos, beauty, strength, and bond. In Galar, tradition, change, and unity. Each one is another form of the same triangle that began with 3 small creatures in 1 small lab. The internal development tools used for red and green were later updated for every new region. In the corner of the software interface, a small message still reads, "Kanto Engine." It is a relic, a signature, a digital ghost of the beginning that powers every future. The surfing mechanic, used in modern games, still runs on the original movement script from the first generation, slightly modified, but fundamentally unchanged. Every wave in every Pokemon world is a continuation of that first lap of blue water coded in 1996. The name Pokemon was almost changed in early localization drafts. One proposal suggested calling the creatures Capsulmons to reference the original capsule monsters. The idea was abandoned, but a folder with that title still exists in Game Freak's archives, labeled Early Dreams. The trading mechanic remains one of the most symbolic features ever created in gaming. It required 2 players, 2 worlds, and a connection line, a literal bridge between imagination. The link cable wasn't just hardware, it was philosophy turned tangible. Every evolution that required a trade reminded players that growth was something you could not achieve alone. In Kanto's source code, one variable is named truth. It doesn't control a mechanic, but rather acts as a reference point for debugging a baseline used to test data accuracy. Developers later joked that the world of Pokemon needed a truth value, as if even fiction required honesty. The reason the game saves with the message, "Would you like to save your progress?" rather than "Do you want to save?" was a deliberate choice. It acknowledges that time has passed, that something meaningful has been lived, not just played. Masuda once said that the Pokédex was modeled after the human mind. Each entry is a fragment of knowledge that grows with experience. He compared it to memory itself, incomplete, imperfect, but deeply personal. When Kanto was reimagined in full color for Fire Red and Leaf Green, the artist chose not to redraw the skies completely. They kept the same cloud pattern from the Game Boy era, enlarged and softened, saying, "The sky shouldn't forget." The Poke Flute tune was designed to fit perfectly over the tempo of the Lavender Town theme. When combined, the melodies resolve into harmony. It's a hidden musical truth that sleep and awakening share the same rhythm. The English script for Pokemon Yellow included one extra line added by the translators that doesn't appear in the Japanese version. After defeating the Elite Four, an NPC in the Hall of Fame remarks, "You looked happy out there. It was written as a gift, a small human touch they hoped players would remember." The internal reference name for the player character in early drafts was Satoshi, after the series' creator. The rival was Shigeru, after his friend. Decades later, their friendship still defines the spirit of rivalry across the franchise competition born from respect. The first model of the Pokédex, designed for live events in Japan, actually worked. It contained a screen and speaker, playing cries from the Game Boy samples when buttons were pressed. It was heavy and fragile, but fans described holding it as touching the game's heart. When Let's Go Pikachu and Let's Go Eevee released, the developers intentionally limited the scope of the map to preserve that same simplicity. They said, "We could build forever, but peace is in boundaries." Kanto's final coded coordinate the farthest point from Pallet Town ends exactly at tile 1512. That number divides evenly by 16, the same grid that defines the player's sprite. The math closes the circle. The world fits exactly within itself. The hidden message left by the developers in one backup build reads simply, "We hope you see the kindness we hid here." That kindness still echoes through every version, every remake, every generation. The world changes, the graphics improve, but the feeling remains a small adventure about empathy disguised as pixels. Every later Pokemon that learns to rest, every melody that loops without end, every saving icon that blinks in time with a heart, all of it is Kanto, still breathing softly under newer skies. And if you listen closely, somewhere beyond the hum of menus and the music of memory, you can almost hear the sound that began everything, that quiet click of start, that whisper of yes, because Kanto never truly ended. It just fell asleep, waiting for you to return.